Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to go over your spouse in astrology, how to determine who your spouse is, their characteristics, and really determine the essence of who they are. And so by the end of this video, you guys are going to find out the traits and characteristics of your spouse. If you felt like you met them already, you can see if the description I give you matches your current spouse. And if you haven't met them yet, then by the end, you're going to find out what exactly they will be like. So let's just get into this video. So the technique we're going to use right now has its roots in Vedic astrology, more specifically Gemini astrology, and we're not going to get too technical about the version of astrology we're using, but you will need your Vedic chart for this to make sense. So I'll put a screen recording on the screen right now of how to calculate your Vedic chart, and then I'll put the link down below to calculate your chart if you don't have your Vedic chart already. I know some of you guys probably know your Vedic chart already, so you don't need this instruction, but for those who don't have the Vedic chart yet, go ahead and just follow this instruction and you guys will find out how to find your spouse. Okay guys, so here's how to get your Vedic birth chart. So obviously this is pretty self-explanatory. Just put your birth data in and then click get birth chart. And this link is down below, by the way. And so you just want to go to this section. Don't look at the little chart up above, but just this, I guess, breakdown in this little chart section. And we're going to look at the degrees only. So we're only looking at degrees here is the main thing we're looking at. Don't pay attention to like the signs and everything. That'll just be confusing. Just look at the degree section, which is this like third column, and take a screenshot of that because it's going to matter for the next thing I tell you guys. Okay, so how we're going to see our spouse with our Vedic chart is by looking at the planet in our Vedic chart with the lowest degree. Now, in Vedic astrology, the lowest degree planet is called the Darakaraka. Now, to simplify it, we'll call it the DK planet. So throughout this video, I'll reference it as the DK planet, but the real name for it is Darakaraka, which is more complicated. But so the DK planet is the planet that represents your spouse's essence, their characteristics, and basically the quality of the kind of spouse you will have. So in Vedic astrology, they don't always consider Pluto, Neptune, or Uranus. So in this video, we're not considering Uranus, Pluto, or Neptune because with this technique it only counts these 7 inner planets. So only use obviously Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Those are the only planets we're using. So whatever one of those planets has the lowest degree is your DK planet, and we're going to use that for this entire video. Okay, so let's start off with the sun. Now, if you have the sun as your DK planet, that means that the sun is the planet with the lowest degrees in your Vedic chart. And so the sun is going to be the energy of your potential spouse. And if you already have a spouse, then your current spouse probably has some sort of sun influence in their chart. So the way this can manifest is that they can be a Leo, either sun, moon, or rising. They can have Leo energy, meaning they have prominent 5th house placements, important planets in their 5th house. So even if they're not literally like a Leo person, they can have, like, let's say they're an Aries, but they have sun in the 5th house. And that can really embody that Leo energy because 5th house is the natural house of Leo. But let's really talk about the traits your spouse might have and the kind of person they will be. So the kind of person you might have as a spouse is someone who's very dependable, very dedicated, somebody who is really confident. Sun energy is all about leading. It's this energy that wants to dominate, that wants to project and inspire its energy onto other people. It's a very creative energy as well. So your spouse might really embody all of those certain traits. And of course, when you think about Leo energy and sun energy, it wants to achieve things. So you might have a spouse who is very overachieving, someone who is very ambitious. Also, the sun is an indicator of fame in astrology. So you can have a spouse that is somewhat famous. It doesn't have to literally be like super famous, I guess, but someone who is maybe popular, well-liked, somebody who is known by a lot of people. Maybe they're really known in their field. Either way, the sun wants to be seen. The sun wants to project its energy onto people. So you might attract a spouse. And ultimately, your spouse will be someone who is kind of embodying that sun energy. And also, I will say about sun being your DK planet, I feel like the person you ultimately attract is somebody who is very good at laying a foundation. Maybe they feel like a foundation for you. They feel very sturdy. I feel like sun influenced people are very like sturdy people, if that makes sense. I feel like they're people who are almost very loyal, very dedicated to what they do, dedicated to their partners. I think loyal is a huge word with sun people and Leo people as well. So you can expect your spouse to kind of embody that energy. Also, the sun is a very masculine planet, and so you might attract a very masculine spouse. So again, someone who is the leader, somebody who wants to dominate, somebody who wants to achieve things, and just think about those masculine traits your spouse might naturally embody and be sort of like that archetypical manly man. And so let's talk about the shadow side of your spouse really quickly. So as I mentioned in the first chunk of this video, when it comes to determining your spouse, if your sun is not in a good place in your own chart and the sun is your DK planet, then your spouse won't really manifest as the positive traits I just mentioned. Now, obviously your spouse can manifest as the positive traits I mentioned, but when you have a kind of badly placed sun or badly aspected sun, then you might not get the more positive traits, you might get the shadow traits in your partner. So the shadow traits of your partner, if your DK planet is not well placed and it is the sun, is that you might attract a partner who is more egotistical, someone who's really domineering, somebody who just wants to control things and control others. And you can really just think about the more negative aspects of the sun, the negative aspects of Leo, right? Someone who is arrogant, someone who is self-centered. So you might get the more negative manifestation of the sun if your DK planet is not well placed. So what is a well-placed DK planet? What is a not well-placed DK planet? That's a whole nother video, but just an example, a not well-placed DK planet or a not well-placed sun is, for example, a sun that's sitting in the 12th house or a sun sitting in the 6th house. Sun does the best, for example, in the 10th house. Sun does really well in the 5th house because the sun wants to be there. But the sun doesn't really want to be in houses like the 8th house or the 6th house or the 12th house. And so not to say that you will get all like the negative aspects of the sun, but just kind of consider that when you are, thinking about your future spouse or the person that you're with now as your spouse, is that you might not just get the perfect manifestation of the sun, because nobody's sun is perfect, I guess, unless you have an exalted sun. So if you have an exalted sun in the sign of Aries and it's in the 10th house, then you will get the very positive manifestation that I just mentioned. But if you have like the sun in the 12th house conjunct Saturn, then you're not going to get the positive manifestation of the sun because your sun is not well placed in your own chart. So really think about the placement of your sun in your own chart and if it's well placed or if it's not well placed. I might do a video about planets that are well placed or not well placed, but you guys can Google that until I make that video. And tell me down below if that's something you want to see on my channel. And so yeah, that's your spouse if you have the sun as your DK planet. Okay, so let's talk about the traits and characteristics of your spouse if you have moon as your DK planet. So when it comes to having the moon as your DK planet, obviously you might attract a spouse who is Cancer, somebody with prominent Cancer energy in their chart. So either Cancer, Sun, Moon, or Rising. This could be someone with prominent 4th house placements. So even if they have no Cancer in their chart, they can have, let's say, a 4th house Sun. Maybe they have Moon in the 4th house. Anything having to do with the 4th house or Cancer energy, your spouse might have that in their chart and embody that in how they act and in their characteristics. So let's talk a little bit about the traits and characteristics of your spouse if you have moon as your DK planet. So obviously with the moon, it is naturally ruling Cancer, and the moon is naturally a planet that is very sensitive, very emotional, and it might manifest as a person who is sensitive and emotional. It also might manifest as someone who is very nurturing, very feminine. Obviously, the moon is, I feel like, the most feminine planet, along with Venus as well, but moon is a very feminine energy. So if you're a girl watching this and you're thinking about like a guy spouse or a guy husband, then your guy husband might be very feminine, even if he is a man. And so to go along with this moon theme, your person might also be very sympathetic, someone very understanding. I feel like the key word here is nurturing, because that's really what the moon wants to do. It wants to nurture people. It wants to really cultivate bonds with other people. And speaking of bonds, that's another key trait I feel like that will be manifested in your relationship with your spouse is having a very close emotional bond with that person. I feel like moon influence people really are keen on relationships and bonding with people. So you will have a spouse that's very keen on bonding with you on an emotional level, on a very intimate level. Moon is a very intimate planet. It's the planet that is closest to us. It's the planet that represents femininity. It represents our mother as well. So you can really consider those elements when thinking about your spouse, if you have one already, or your future spouse if you don't already. And so also your spouse might be someone who is a homebody, somebody who likes to be at home. Again, the moon rules home. It rules the past. It rules, like I said, it rules the mother as well. So it could be someone who does seem kind of motherly almost. Like I said, even if it is your husband, for example, they might feel sort of motherly to you, very nurturing. And also I will say that the moon is a very social planet too. So your partner can be someone who is very social, who likes building bonds with others. So they want to build a bond with you, of course, but they want to build a bond with other people too. So they can be very social in that sense. Also, they might have a very changeable personality. I feel like that's the key thing with the moon that a lot of people don't talk about, is that the moon changes phases like literally every day. So usually moon dominant people, moon influenced people, Cancers, for example, can be very moody. They can change their personality often. They can just be very, unstable emotionally sometimes. So depending on the quality of your moon, you can attract a person who expresses the highest manifestation of the moon, which is the traits I just mentioned. But right now I'll mention some of the shadow traits of the moon and shadow traits of your person if your moon isn't really well placed in your birth chart. And then also I will say, with the moon being your DK planet, you might attract a spouse who is very attractive. Usually someone with a DK planet that is the moon or Venus, even Jupiter, I would say, can attract someone who is more conventionally attractive. They might have a beautiful face, nice skin. So if you have a DK planet as the moon, then you might have an attractive spouse. But anyway, when it comes to shadow traits of your person, if your DK planet is the moon, we can just think of shadow traits of the moon, shadow traits of like Cancer energy, which is very clingy, very moody, very manipulative. I think the biggest thing with like a moon influenced person that is like the lower manifestation of that is someone who is quite emotionally unstable, somebody who acts one way one day and then changes it the next day. There's this sense of inconsistency with moon energy. So I feel like the highest expression of moon energy is more nurturing, it is more sociable. I feel like the lower expression of moon energy is more clingy, it's grudgeful, manipulative, emotionally manipulative. So you can kind of think about that. And so how do you know if you'll get the more positive traits like I mentioned or the negative traits? Now this depends on the moon in your own chart. So if you have a really well-placed moon, then you'll get the more positive traits I just mentioned in the beginning. And then if you have a more debilitated moon or a moon that's not well-placed, then you won't get the positive traits, but you'll get more of the shadow traits, if that makes sense. And usually people just end up with a spouse that has kind of both of those things. You're not going to get like the perfect person, or hopefully you won't just get like a terrible person, but usually people will get kind of like something in the middle, because most of our charts have planets that are kind of well placed, but not the best placed, if that makes sense. So a debilitated moon or a moon that's not really well placed is probably like a Scorpio moon, especially in your Vedic chart. If you have a Scorpio moon, moon is debilitated in Scorpio, so you might get some of the shadow traits of that moon energy I was talking about. So someone who's really moody, grudgeful, manipulative. And if your moon is like conjunct Saturn, or if it's sitting in the 12th house, or your moon's conjunct Mars, just think about that and consider all the planets influencing your moon. And if you have any harsh planets like Saturn or Mars influencing your moon, if your moon is in Scorpio, then you really will receive more of the shadow aspects of the moon in your partner. And so conversely, if you have an exalted moon, so like moon in Taurus, especially in your Vedic chart, you'll get the more positive traits of a moon influenced person. So someone who's nurturing, loyal, caring, sociable. Also, moon does pretty well in the 4th house. I feel like the moon does pretty well in the 5th house as well. So just consider those things. If your moon is conjunct Venus and that's your DK planet, then you're going to get, I would say, the highest expression of this. So just think about the moon and where it's placed in your chart. If it's debilitated, then shadow traits. If it's exalted, then more like the positive traits of the moon. If your moon is kind of like in the middle, where it's like not exalted but not debilitated, you'll get kind of like in the middle traits of a moon influenced person. So essentially that is your spouse and partner and person you will marry if your DK planet is the moon. Okay, so let's talk about the traits and characteristics of your spouse if your DK planet is Mercury. So if your DK planet is Mercury, that means that Mercury is the planet with the lowest degrees in your Vedic chart. And we already calculated that in the beginning, so you already know that your DK planet is Mercury. So when it comes to Mercury being your DK planet, you're going to have a spouse that is very Mercury influenced. Now, what does this look like? It looks like somebody who might be a Gemini, so Gemini sun, moon, or rising. They might be a Virgo sun, moon, or rising, or they might have very prominent third house energy or prominent sixth house energy. So obviously there's a lot of combinations to be had there, but I would say if they're not a Gemini, if they're not a Virgo, they might have prominent third house energy. So let's say they're a third house sun, they might have moon in the third house. And then if they don't have Gemini or Virgo directly in their chart, maybe they have their sun in the sixth house or they have their moon in the sixth house. So you can kind of just think about those variations. And if you've met your spouse already, you can just look at their chart and see like, okay, yeah, they have a lot of planets in their third house. And my DK planet is Mercury, then that kind of matches up. If you're with a Gemini or you're with a Virgo, then that kind of matches up with your DK planet being Mercury. So let's talk about the description of your spouse and specifically the characteristics they will have and the traits they will have as well. So really when it comes to judging your DK planet and your spouse, you also have to look at the house that it's in as well. So right now I'm going to list the general traits and descriptions of a Mercury DK planet spouse, but also look at your house too, because that adds more dimension to this. But right now I'm just going to give you like the general description of a Mercury person, if that is your DK planet. So when it comes to Mercury being your DK planet, your spouse will be someone who has that Mercury influence about them and really has that Mercury influence and essence about their soul and their personality. So they can be someone who's very friendly, someone who's very sociable, someone who is very dynamic as well. Also someone who's really funny too. I feel like that's a key thing with Mercury energy. It's very almost childlike in the sense that it loves to exchange knowledge. It loves to exchange ideas. It loves to banter with people, right? Which is like the epitome of like Gemini energy. So hence why you might attract a Gemini prominent spouse. So I will say the key thing about Mercury being your DK planet and how it influences your relationship with your spouse is that it really cultivates this sense of friendship with your spouse. So you might have a spouse who was your friend before they became your spouse. You might have a spouse that just really feels very friendly with you. Like I said, Mercury energy is very sociable. It is very dynamic. It wants to talk and banter and laugh and giggle. So you can kind of have that friendly, funny sort of energy with your spouse. You might even have that sort of almost dynamic where it's like brotherly or sisterly, where you guys like make fun of each other. Maybe you roast each other a lot. There's that element of lightheartedness with your partner. So you might have a spouse that is very lighthearted, someone who likes to make jokes, somebody who just wants to enjoy things, someone who's really fun loving, someone who is very dynamic, changeable. They want to talk to everyone. They want to try different things. I feel like with Mercury energy, it's just so dynamic and it's really lighthearted and fun loving are the keywords I would say with your spouse and some of the traits they might have. And also I will add that this could indicate having a spouse that is younger than you. So obviously in astrology, Mercury rules young people. So wherever you have that in your chart, you can kind of see like where I guess young people are present in your life. And so when you have Mercury as your DK planet, you'll have a younger spouse or somebody who just kind of seems younger. Again, with Gemini energy, it can seem kind of childish. Mercury energy seems kind of childish as well. So even if they aren't literally younger than you, they might just seem kind of childish. Maybe they look younger. Either way, they have that youthful energy, youthful essence about them. Okay, so let's talk about the shadow traits of Mercury. And if you have a Mercury in your chart that's not well placed, you will experience more shadow traits, where if you have a really well placed Mercury or an exalted Mercury, you'll get the really, I guess, positive manifestation and positive traits in your spouse, if that makes sense. Whereas if you have a debilitated Mercury, you're going to get some of the shadow traits I'm going to mention. So I'll tell you guys in a second how to know if you have, I guess, a well-placed Mercury or a not well-placed Mercury. But when it comes to the shadow traits, obviously with a Mercury influenced person, they can be someone who is childish, someone who is unstable, someone who's really flighty, and inconsistent. Really, I feel like the shadow energy of Mercury is someone who you can't rely on at all, someone who is a trickster, someone who is a liar. Now I wouldn't say Mercury energy is kind of like a malicious liar. I feel like Mercury energy is more so someone who will just like lie for fun or something like that. Or like I said, there's this like trickster energy with the shadow side of Mercury. So when it comes to having a not well-placed Mercury, you can have the shadow elements really manifest in your spouse. So someone who is unstable, someone who is childish, someone who is kind of tricky and kind of, I would say cunning is a really huge word with the shadow energy of Mercury. And so how do you know if you have a well-placed Mercury or not well-placed Mercury? Now that's like its own video, but just some examples. If you have a debilitated Mercury, so if your Mercury is in Pisces and it's like in the 7th house, your Mercury is not well-placed because it is debilitated in the sign of Pisces. But if your Mercury is exalted and your Mercury is in Aquarius, let's say in the 1st house, then your Mercury is actually very, very strong and you get the more positive manifestations of a Mercury influenced person. Whereas if you have a weaker Mercury, then you get kind of like the more shadow traits of Mercury influenced people, if that makes sense. So obviously you can have a Mercury that's kind of like in the middle where it's like not the best placed Mercury, but it's not the worst either. I will say the planets that conjunct Mercury also have a role in this. So obviously if your Mercury conjuncts Saturn or it conjuncts Mars, then those are planets that kind of negatively influence Mercury. Whereas if you had like Venus or Jupiter touching your Mercury or conjunct your Mercury, then you would have the more beneficial aspects of a Mercury influenced person. So just consider the quality of your Mercury. I might make a separate video about Mercury, or not really Mercury, but like debilitated planets and exalted planets. If you guys want to see that, tell me down below. But you can just Google like debilitated Mercury, exalted Mercury, well-placed Mercury, not well-placed Mercury. And obviously if your Mercury is well-placed, then you will have the positive manifestations of Mercury influenced people. And then if you have a not so well placed Mercury, you might have the shadow elements of Mercury more so manifest in your spouse. Now obviously you'll get a spouse that probably embodies both of those things, so not everyone is perfect and has the best traits, but you might just probably have someone who has a mixture of both of those things. So someone with the shadow elements of Mercury or someone with the positive elements of Mercury. Or just kind of like a mixture of both. So yeah, that is your spouse. If you have Mercury as your DK planet, tell me down below if that is your planet and I'll leave a description for your spouse too. Okay, so let's talk about the traits, characteristics, and personality of your spouse if you have Venus as your DK planet. Okay, so right away when it comes to Venus being your DK planet, your spouse might literally be a Libra or they can be a Taurus. So they might be a Libra sun, moon, or rising, or have a Libra somewhere very prominently in their charts, or they can be a Taurus sun, moon, or rising, or have Taurus prominently in their charts. If they don't have either of those signs in their charts, then they might have prominent 2nd house placements. So let's say they're not a Libra or a Taurus, but they have sun in the 2nd house, then they do kind of embody that Taurus energy. And let's say they have moon in the 2nd house, they still have that Taurus energy. And then if they don't have any Libra or Taurus in their chart, but they have sun in the 7th house or moon in the 7th house, then they embody that Libra energy because Libra rules 7th house, Taurus rules 2nd house. So there's a lot of combinations with that energy. So you can just think about that if you know your spouse already and look at their chart and see if they have 2nd house placements, 7th house placements, or have Libra or Taurus prominently in their charts. So right now we're going to talk about the specific traits and characteristics your spouse will have if you have Venus as your DK planet. So of course, when it comes to Venus energy, we can really assimilate that with your spouse and what they might be like. And so what is Venus energy? Venus energy is all about luxury. It's all about this sense of being fair-minded, being balanced. Libra and Taurus energy rules aesthetics. Venus rules aesthetics. So this can be someone who is very much into aesthetics, somebody who is into art or music or culture, anything that is kind of more indulgent, so art specifically, music specifically. They can really be into those fields or be really interested in luxury overall. And then also they might be someone who is literally very physically beautiful. I will say usually with like a Venus as your DK planet, your partner might be very physically attractive. So it can go either way with either of the genders. So if you're a man watching this for like a wife, then your wife might be very beautiful physically. And then if you're a woman looking for a husband, then your husband might be very physically beautiful, physically attractive. And so when it comes to their personality, you might have a spouse that is really diplomatic, someone who is very charming, very social, someone who can be almost sort of like a socialite as well, someone who is very collaborative with others, someone who's quite popular. Again, there's this theme of indulgence when it comes to Venus. And so your spouse might be someone who wants to indulge in socializing, indulge in art, indulge in music, just really surround themselves with beauty overall. Because I feel like that's what Venus really wants to do, is just surround itself with something beautiful, surround itself with aesthetics. And it's very keen on aesthetics, socializing. And I will say when it comes to how they behave is that there's someone who is very balanced, someone who is very fair-minded, someone who can kind of be like that person you go to and they just kind of give you good advice because they have such a balanced, neutral mindset. So your person might be very sensual as well and love indulging their five senses. So how do you do that? Of course, you eat good food, you wear nice clothes, you listen to good music. Venus is really coming down to the sense of aesthetics and refinement. So your person might really embody that refined energy, that sensual energy, someone who just really has naturally good taste with things and likes to indulge in aesthetics. And also your person might be very romantic as well, and they like to spoil you, buy you gifts. Maybe their love language has to do with materialism and things that do relate back to that Venus energy. And then let's talk about the shadow traits of Venus, because of course not everyone's going to get the best manifestation of a Venus influenced person. And so when it comes to kind of like the manifestation of the person you get, you can either get like the more shadow traits manifested in a person, so in your spouse, or the more positive traits I just listed off. So if you have a well-placed Venus in your chart, you'll get the positive traits. If you have kind of like not so well-placed Venus, you'll get the more shadow traits. So let me list these shadow traits, then I'll tell you guys how to know if you have a well-placed Venus or a not so well-placed Venus. So the shadow traits of Venus is definitely that a Venus influenced person, and the more shadow perspective is someone who can be quite judgmental. Like I said, with Venus, it's very much about refinement. And so when it comes to refinement, you have to be very discriminatory and you have to choose the best option. And so the negative manifestation of that, or the shadow side of that, is definitely someone who is very judgmental, someone who's very picky. The highest octave of that is someone who is good at refinement and choosing the best option, but the negative part of that is someone who is picky, someone who's judgmental, someone who is overindulgent. With Venus, it's all about luxury, it's about aesthetics, and you can have a person that is quite materialistic, quite overindulgent if your Venus is not well placed. So let's talk about like well-placed Venus and not so well-placed Venus. So a well-placed Venus obviously is a Venus that is exalted, and Venus is exalted in Pisces, and also Venus does well in the 12th house. So if you have a Venus in Pisces, especially in your Vedic chart, if you have Venus in the 12th house, then that kind of denotes more of the positive manifestations of Venus manifesting in your spouse. And those are like the first traits I mentioned. And then you'll get more of the shadow side of Venus if your Venus is not well placed. So I believe Venus is debilitated in Virgo. So if you have your Venus in Virgo, especially in your Vedic chart, if you have your Venus in, let's say, the 6th house, if you have your Venus in I think Venus doesn't do too well in the 8th house either, but you guys can Google like the quality of your Venus, or I might do a separate video about your quality of your Venus. But basically, if your Venus is not so well placed, you might have a spouse that's a little bit more critical, who's very picky, judgmental, and really expresses that more negative energy of Venus. Whereas if your Venus is well placed, then you'll have the more positive traits of a Venus influenced person. And also I will say the planets that are with your Venus matter a lot too. So if Venus is your DK planet and it's conjunct Saturn, then your Venus isn't doing too well in your chart, because Saturn is malefic and then Venus is quite benefic. However, it doesn't always suggest having a spouse that's like the shadow traits of Venus, but you just might not get the best version of Venus if you have, let's say, Venus conjunct Saturn, Venus conjunct Mars, Venus in, let's say, the 6th house. You might not get the best manifestation if you have Venus in Virgo. And then if you have Venus, let's say, in the 12th house, Venus, I feel like does well in the, I believe Venus does well in the 2nd house or the 7th house, then you get the more positive traits of Venus. And then if Venus is in Pisces or Venus is in its home sign like Taurus or Libra, then you get the more positive manifestation of a Venus influenced person. So that is your partner and your spouse if you have Venus as your DK planet. Tell me down below if Venus is your DK planet, and if you've met your spouse already, tell me if it matches up with this whole description. And if you haven't met your spouse yet, I'll reply to some comments and tell you some traits about your spouse, and also tell you if your Venus is well placed or not so well placed in your chart. Okay, so let's talk about the traits, characteristics, and personality of your spouse if your DK planet is Mars. So obviously right away, with your DK planet being Mars, your spouse might be someone who has prominent Mars energy in their chart. So what does that look like? It could be someone with prominent Aries placements, so Aries sun, Aries moon, Aries rising, or somebody with Scorpio energy, so Scorpio sun, Scorpio moon, Scorpio rising, because Mars rules both of those signs. And then also, if they don't have Scorpio or Aries at all in their chart, they might have Mars in the first house, Mars in the second house, maybe they have Mars in the 8th house. So if they have Mars anywhere placed very prominently in their chart, if they had Mars conjunct moon, for example, or Mars conjunct the sun, then their chart really matches the description of someone with a lot of Mars energy in their chart. So obviously there's like a lot of variations of Mars dominance. So you guys can just like look at your partner's chart if you have one already and see if it matches that Mars dominance. So if you haven't met your spouse yet, just expect someone who is more Mars influenced. So like I said, Aries, Scorpio, first house energy, 8th house energy, anything like that. So let's get into the specific personality and traits and characteristics your spouse will have if you have Mars as your DK planet. Okay, so right away with Mars energy, it is very assertive, it is very bold. So you might get a spouse who is very assertive, very bold, someone who is very driven and very ambitious. Mars really wants to accomplish things. Mars has a lot of willpower. So if someone is Mars dominant, if they have a lot of Mars in their chart, they want to accomplish things, of course, and they have a lot of drive and a lot of willpower. So of course, Aries people, Scorpio placements have that natural Mars willpower and natural Mars drive and thirst for achieving things. And so Mars does give someone who is very bold, someone who is very assertive, someone who will just do something and not think too much about it. They are very almost impulsive in a sense, and we'll get into more shadow traits of Mars in a second. But in the more positive manifestation, it does rule someone who is more decisive, someone who can just assess a situation very quickly and then decide the right option or path to take very quickly. Mars is a very quick-paced energy, and it isn't too slow. It's not like Saturn, right? So your partner might really embody that same energy of being very quick-paced, especially very mentally quick-paced, if that makes sense. They might have a quick mind. They might react to things very quickly. They might be very logical as well. People with Mars dominance are very logical. I don't think that gets talked about enough with Mars dominant people, but Mars dominant people are good at really assessing things and making the right decision if their Mars is well placed. And then also, given this Mars energy, you might have a spouse that is very capable, very competent, someone who I would say likes to achieve things and like is good at many things too. I feel like Mars people are very skillful and like good at practicing things and might have a trade or a craft they're very skilled at, or they're just naturally good at a lot of things. I feel like Mars kind of does that in someone's chart. Also, they might be someone who's very athletic too. I think I talked about that in the other spouse prediction video I did on my channel, but having Mars, especially like in your 7th house, or having Mars as your DK planet, you'll really attract someone who is very active, who likes going outside, who's athletic, likes going to the gym. Mars is a very physical planet, so you might have a very physical spouse or someone who's very physically oriented, if that makes sense. So they like to go outside, go to the gym, they might do something athletic for their career, anything like that. Okay, so let's talk about the shadow aspects of Mars. So when it comes to the shadow aspects, you will kind of experience more of these shadow aspects of Mars, which I will list out in a second, if your Mars is not so well placed in your chart. So the traits I just listed off are obviously the traits of a really well placed Mars in your chart. So I'll let you guys know at the end whether or not your Mars is well placed or it's not well placed. So the shadow traits I'm going to list off really apply if your Mars isn't well placed. And then if your Mars is well placed, obviously you just heard the kind of better manifestation of Mars energy. So when it comes to shadow traits of Mars, of course, it does manifest as a spouse or somebody who is impulsive, someone who's aggressive, someone who is very arrogant or dogmatic, also someone who is very argumentative. And then, of course, the cherry on the cake is that a Mars-dominant person, or the shadow traits of a Mars-dominant person, is that they can be very childish. So, like I said, with Mars energy, it is very aggressive. It is a physical sort of energy. So your partner can be somewhat aggressive. They might be physically aggressive. They also might be very dogmatic or arrogant. So I feel like that's a specific one that I feel like does manifest in a lot of Mars dominant people. So when it comes to Mars dominant energy, it is decisive, right? But some people can be so decisive to the point where it's like they think that their point is the only right point and they can't see any other, I guess, option or any other contribution to whatever, I guess, they believe. So that's what dogmatic really means, I guess, is like someone who's just like, this is right, this is what I think, and no one can change that. So they can have that really unchangeable mentality where it's like, okay, what I said was right, you can't change my mind, you know, very stubborn sort of mentality. And then also, of course, that kind of goes hand in hand with arrogance. So you can attract someone, or your spouse might be someone who is somewhat arrogant, who thinks they're the bee's knees, or thinks what they think is like the bee's knees or is right all the time. Someone who can be very argumentative and really willing to defend their point even if it is wrong. So someone with shadow Mars energy can really be resistant to change and resistant to feedback, resistant to opinions of others, resistant to criticism. However, with a more developed Mars, or a more, I guess, positive manifestation of Mars energy, it is more, I guess, decisive. It's more of a leader. It's more open to people, I guess, trying to give feedback to them. And also with the shadow energy of Mars, it is very impulsive. So you can have a spouse that spends money impulsively, does things impulsively, does things without thinking. So of course, another shadow trait of Mars is impulsivity. So someone who just does things quickly without thinking, makes decisions quickly without thinking, overspends money because they did it impulsively. I feel like the higher vibration of that is what we just talked about. So someone who can like assess the situation and then make a decision quickly and be decisive, but then the shadow part of that is impulsivity. So I guess the biggest shadow trait, or one of the main shadow traits of a Mars influenced person, is someone who is quite childish. Again, I feel like everything I just mentioned as a shadow trait is kind of childish in itself. Like a child is impulsive, a child is someone who will kind of just not consider their parents', I guess, feedback, or kind of have that mentality where it's like, okay, this is what I want to do. It's all about me, I. So just think about that sort of childish energy when you're thinking about shadow Mars people. And so how do you know if you'll get the more shadow traits of Mars manifested into your spouse, or the more positive traits manifested into your spouse? You can look at your own Mars in your chart. So of course, Mars is your DK planet, but what exactly is a well-placed Mars and what is a kind of badly placed Mars? Of course, a well-placed Mars is a Mars that is exalted. So Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Also, Mars does pretty well in the 10th house. It does well in the, I would say, 9th house. You guys can Google all the combinations, but these are just some of the combinations I'm going to tell you right now. So exalted Mars is Capricorn in the 10th house. That's the best version of Mars you will get. So you will get the more positive manifestation of a Mars person, like I just mentioned earlier in the video. But if your Mars is not well placed, so if your Mars is debilitated, it is debilitated in Cancer. It's also debilitated kind of like in the 4th house. So if you have your Mars in the 4th house, or it's debilitated in Cancer, then you might get a spouse that kind of manifests the more shadow traits of Mars, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of combinations in your chart that leads to a really well placed Mars and a not well placed Mars. And that's like its own video. I might do a video about exaltations and debilitations in charts, but you guys kind of get the gist of what I'm talking about. And you guys can Google too whether or not you have a well-placed Mars or not well-placed Mars, or well-placed planets in general. Also, what contributes to that is planets that are conjunct your Mars. So if you have Venus conjunct Mars, then it does kind of boost the, I guess, quality of your Mars, so it's not so badly placed. But if you had, like, I don't know, Saturn conjunct Mars, then that doesn't kind of do too well with your Mars. It kind of debilitates your Mars a bit, and you get the more shadow traits manifested in your spouse consequently. So Also, too, if you had Jupiter conjunct Mars, that's a pretty good placement. So that kind of leads to more exaltation of your Mars. And so just think about the combinations of like well-placed planets, not well-placed planets, and then you can expect the more shadow traits to manifest in a spouse or the more positive traits to manifest in a spouse as well. So that's essentially what your spouse will be like if you have Mars as your DK planet. And comment down below if you have a spouse already and they kind of match up with this. And tell me more about your own placements in your chart, and I'll comment down below and tell you whether or not it will manifest as more of the shadow traits in a person or a more positive, I guess, traits in your spouse. And also tell me down below your own placements. So like if you have Mars in the second house, Mars in the first house, Mars in Cancer, Mars in Pisces, and I'll try to describe for you what your spouse will be like, because usually the house your Mars is in will really give you a better picture about your spouse, and the sign it's in really gives you a better picture about your spouse, and the planets that is touching your Mars gives you a way better picture about your spouse. So tell me down below and I will reply to your comments and give you some insight about your spouse. Okay, so let's talk about the traits, characteristics, and personality of your spouse if you have Jupiter as your DK planet. So of course, right away with Jupiter as your DK planet, that means Jupiter is the planet with the lowest degree in your Vedic chart, which we established earlier in this video. And so what does that mean, and what does that manifest as in a spouse? Well, that could mean that you attract a spouse who has a lot of Jupiter energy in their chart. So what does that look like? Usually a Sagittarius. So Sagittarius, sun, moon, rising. Sagittarius just kind of like prominently in someone's chart. It could also manifest as a Pisces. So Pisces, sun, moon, or rising, since Pisces is ruled by Jupiter and Sag is ruled by Jupiter as well. And then if they don't have Sag or Pisces at all in their chart, they can have prominent Jupiter placements. So maybe they have Jupiter in the first house, Jupiter in the second house, Jupiter conjunct their sun. They might have Jupiter, let's say, in the ninth house, or they have a lot of planets in the ninth house, or even like a ninth house stellium or a 12th house stellium, since 12th house is the house of Pisces and ninth house is the house of Sagittarius. So there's a lot of combinations that you guys can look at with that. And if you have a spouse already, it's pretty cool to see whether or not your spouse has that Sag energy, Pisces energy, ninth house energy, 12th house energy, or Jupiter energy in their chart, just given the fact that your DK planet is Jupiter. Okay, let's talk specifically about the traits of your spouse, the characteristics of your spouse, and really like what your spouse will be like based on this Jupiter energy being your DK planet. So when it comes to having Jupiter as your DK planet, you might have a spouse that is very religious, somebody who is very philosophical, somebody that really has this sense of values about them. Maybe they have a belief system. Even if they aren't religious, maybe they're very spiritual, but either way, they have this kind of moral code they really abide to, and they're not shy about telling other people about it. So I feel like we've all met Sagittarius people, we've all met Pisces people, or Jupiter dominant people, and they tend to have that way about them that really goes back to some sort of moral code that they have. So you can attract a person or have a spouse that is sort of like that. And so oftentimes that manifests as someone that is religious, someone that is spiritual, someone that is very philosophical if they aren't religious or spiritual. Someone who's just very knowledgeable about many things is also a huge hallmark of a Jupiter person. So you will have a spouse that is very knowledgeable, someone who is very intelligent, somebody that knows a lot about a lot of different things. This can be someone who is very well read, somebody who is well educated, somebody who maybe knows a lot of different languages, maybe they are well traveled as well. Anything that really kind of is associated back to Jupiter, your spouse really embodies that energy and those traits as well. So of course, what else is Jupiter known for? It's known for being this very benefic, very prosperous planet. So your spouse might be someone who is very prosperous. They might be even wealthy or rich or have a lot of money. They might have a lot of assets. They might be kind of wealthy in knowledge as well. There's this sense of wealth a lot of the times with Jupiter people, and usually they have, I guess, wealth, like literal wealth, like material wealth, but I feel like they could also have high self-esteem, a lot of knowledge, know a lot about a lot of different things, know many people. Jupiter really gives this sense of luck and abundance in a chart, and it really represents that in astrology. So for you, since you have Jupiter as your DK planet, your spouse will really embody those lucky, abundant traits that Jupiter carries with it. And so of course, what else is Jupiter known for? It's known for being this very joyous energy, very optimistic energy, It's like this very happy-go-lucky energy, right? So you can attract a spouse who is very happy naturally, very optimistic. Also, Jupiter is very generous. It's very forgiving. It's a planet that doesn't really know boundaries, or it doesn't really know limits. And we'll talk about like the shadow traits of Jupiter in a second. But the more positive manifestation of that is someone who is very generous, very forgiving. Like I said, they can be someone who is very wealthy, for example, and they want to give their wealth to you as their wife or their husband, since this is a spouse we're talking about. And so also, since Jupiter is relevant to foreign places, foreign lands, it's relevant to travel as well. You can have a spouse that is from a different culture than you, different ethnicity than you. Maybe you meet them in a whole different country than you. Either way, there's that sense of like, I guess, geographical difference between you and your spouse. So there's kind of a high chance your spouse might not be from the same culture as you, or same ethnicity as you, or same even country as you. Okay, so let's talk about the shadow traits of Jupiter, and we're going to talk about whether or not you will have a spouse who embodies more of the shadow traits or more of the positive traits like I just mentioned. So with the shadow traits of Jupiter, of course, since Jupiter doesn't really have boundaries like that, it kind of lends itself to excessiveness. It lends itself to overindulgence. It lends itself to blind optimism, or even I feel like the biggest thing is someone who is really preachy. So like I said earlier, when it comes to Jupiter energy and Jupiter people, and your spouse who is probably like a Jupiter influenced person, there's somebody who has a sense of moral code. They might have a certain moral code that they follow very strictly. They might be very religious, or have a certain religion they follow, or philosophy they follow, and they're not really shy about preaching their ideas, right? And so I feel like the more shadow side of Jupiter is someone who is very preachy, someone who's kind of dogmatic, who's always preaching about their beliefs and not really caring about feedback. That's more of the shadow side of Jupiter, and I feel like we've all met people who have Jupiter energy that are kind of preachy, but preachy not like in an inspiring way, but more so in a like kind of annoying way. So you might kind of get a person who is a bit preachy if your Jupiter is not well placed. And then of course, Jupiter is known for overindulgence. So Jupiter doesn't really know boundaries, so this can be a person who spends too much money, talks too much, eats too much, does things in excess. Like everything they do is kind of extreme, it's over the top. There's no sense of refinement with Jupiter. So you can attract a person in its more shadow state, someone who's just overindulgent, excessive. Also to Jupiter kind of will... The more shadow side of Jupiter is someone who has blind optimism. And I feel like you see that more with Pisces. So someone who's kind of delusional, who has this belief about something that's just not realistic at all. So somebody who can struggle with reality a bit is like the more shadow side of Jupiter. Someone who's kind of dogmatic and can only believe in their ideas, their own moral code, and really just be preachy about it too is the shadow side of Jupiter. So let's talk about whether or not you will get a spouse who manifests the more shadow traits of Jupiter or the more positive traits of Jupiter. So when it comes to determining which you will get, either shadow or positive, you can look at your own Jupiter in your chart. So Jupiter is your DK planet if you're watching this. And so if you have an exalted Jupiter, for example, you will get the positive traits manifested into your partner. If you have a kind of debilitated Jupiter, you might not get the positive traits of Jupiter manifested into your partner. Now, I will say Jupiter is a pretty benefic planet, so either way you probably will get kind of the positive traits of Jupiter manifested into your partner either way. But let's talk about how you can tell in your chart if your Jupiter is well placed or it's not well placed. So obviously a really well placed Jupiter is a Jupiter that is exalted. So if you had Jupiter, for example, I think Jupiter does pretty well in the 4th house. It is exalted in Cancer. So if you had Jupiter in Cancer, you will get the positive manifestation of a Jupiter influenced person. If you had a debilitated Jupiter, so Jupiter in Capricorn, then you might get the negative shadow traits of Jupiter. Or if you had Jupiter in a house like, I think Jupiter does well in pretty much any house, but I feel like it doesn't do too well in like the 6th house, for example. Maybe I would say the 1st house, 2nd house. You guys can Google kind of like the combinations of a well-placed Jupiter or not well-placed Jupiter. But let's say your Jupiter is super exalted. It's in Cancer. It's in the 4th house. Then you will have the really positive aspects of a Jupiter influenced person, like I just mentioned, but you will get the shadow traits if your Jupiter is not well placed. So tell me down below your placements, and then I'll comment back to you and tell you whether or not your Jupiter is well placed or not well placed, and give you some descriptions about your future spouse if you haven't met them yet. And then if you have met them yet, tell me down below your placements and whether or not this matches the description of who they are, and if it matches their chart at all. And so yeah, that is the description of your spouse if you have Jupiter as your DK planet. Okay, so let's talk about the characteristics and traits and personality of your spouse if your DK planet is Saturn. So obviously with your DK planet being Saturn, your spouse will be someone with prominent Saturn energy in their chart. So this will most obviously manifest as someone who is a Capricorn, sun, moon, or rising, potentially an Aquarius, sun, moon, or rising, because Saturn rules both Aquarius and Capricorn. So either one of those signs might be prominent in your spouse's chart. Also, it might be someone with Saturn dominance. So what that looks like is someone with like Saturn in the first house, Saturn in the second house. Maybe they have Saturn in their 10th house, Saturn in the 11th house. Maybe they have Saturn conjunct their moon, Saturn conjunct their sun. So there's like a lot of variations of this Saturn influence in your spouse's chart. So you can just look at the person's chart and see if they have that prominent Saturn influence, either through Capricorn energy, Aquarius energy, or straight up Saturn itself. Okay, so let's get into the specific characteristics, personality traits, and really what your spouse will be like based on your DK planet being Saturn. Okay, so of course the hallmark of Saturn energy is someone who is very responsible, someone who is very serious. And so I feel like with Saturn energy, it really represents what we have to do in life, not what we want to do. I feel like what we want to do is Venus energy. It represents our desires, but Saturn energy is like what our karma is, what is practical, what is logical. And so you can attract a spouse who very much embodies that same sentiment. So of course, Capricorns naturally embody that, Aquarius naturally embody that, but in general, your spouse will be someone who is very logical, someone who is very practical, responsible, someone who really follows the rules. Ultimately, Saturn energy is all about regulation. It's about order. It's about law and order. Like that's literally the epitome of Saturn. And so your person is someone who really embodies those traits, somebody who wants to regulate their life, who wants to have control of their life, be very responsible about things. And so with this Saturn influenced person that is your spouse, there's somebody who is very firm in what they do, very firm in what they believe. Obviously with Saturn energy, it's very stubborn almost, where it's like once they decide something, it's like, okay, this is what they're doing. This is the plan they're following. It's not like Mercury energy. It's not like moon energy that just changes day to day. It's very stable, consistent energy. So your spouse is going to be someone who is very stable, very consistent, very much, I guess, invested in the sense of rules and regulations, following the rules, regulating things, putting order to things. That's what Saturn really wants to do, is put order to things. And we can see that with Capricorn people and Aquarius people. Are people who are just like very order oriented, if that makes sense. And they might even be in a profession where it's like order is very much prioritized. So like the law or legal field, something having to do with justice, maybe politics, things like that. Your person can be involved in those industries or as a profession. And so when it comes to your spouse, or really the dynamic of your relationship, I will say that you might choose a spouse that is kind of practical for you. It's not like you choose a spouse that is like the love of your life or someone you just see and you're like, I need to marry them. So with someone as Saturn as their DK planet, you're going to choose your partner based on very practical reasons, maybe financial reasons, reasons that really make sense. I feel like in today's society, we just choose partners that are just kind of like heat of the moment type of things, or just based on passion or love. But Saturn does what is practical, what is realistic. So you're going to choose your partner based on, I guess, sort of like a realistic perspective, not just like, okay, they're cute, I want to date them. And so you yourself might have very rigid standards or rigid criteria when choosing your partner. So like I said, it's not like you're just going to choose a partner and be like, okay, they're cute, I want to marry them. I feel like you're going to choose a partner and be like, well, what's his credit score, or what's their net worth? Like, what is their goal in life? You're going to choose a partner who is very goal oriented, someone who is worthwhile, not just someone that just looks cute and just stands around and I guess makes you laugh. You're going to choose someone who makes sense in your life. And so given that, I feel like your spouse will be someone who is very, I feel like the word for Saturn as well is sober, someone who is kind of boring. I feel like Capricorns kind of get that title sometimes. It's like a boring personality, but really it's not that they're boring, it's just that they're really focused on the material world. They're focused on realistic things, which seems boring to some people, but obviously with Saturn influenced people, doing realistic things isn't boring. It's necessary for their growth in life. And Saturn people really have the I guess longer term vision they have in their head, or they have a lot of long-term goals. So when it comes to long-term goals, of course, they're going to take a long time to achieve those things, and it's not just like a overnight, like doing what you feel like at the moment type of person. Hence why I feel like a lot of Capricorns get that boring title, but it's not necessarily boring to everyone, just people who aren't Saturn influenced. Of course, I will say with Saturn as your DK planet, you might marry later in life. So usually Saturn does delay marriage, especially depending on the house it's in. So technically a delayed marriage in astrology would be after 30 years old. So usually if you have DK planet as Saturn, you might get married after 30 years, or it's kind of recommended to marry someone after 30 years of age. Like after Saturn return is really like the, I guess, sweet spot of timing when it comes to Saturn being influential on your spouse or who you marry. And also Saturn does rule old age as well, so you can have a spouse that is older than you. And I will say a spouse that is at least like 7 years older than you. Maybe there's a significant age gap, maybe they're 10 years older than you, 20 years older than you. It can really range, but usually Saturn's influence gives someone that is older than you and a spouse that is older than you when you do get married to them. And so let's talk about the shadow sides of Saturn and the shadow sides of a person with Saturn influence. Now, when it comes to your DK planet, if your DK planet is well placed in your chart, if it's exalted, for example, you'll get the positive aspects of Saturn I just mentioned. So someone who's responsible, logical, rule following, etc. But if your Saturn isn't well placed, you'll get more of the shadow traits I'm going to mention right now. So after I mention the shadow traits, I'll tell you guys whether or not you have a well placed Saturn or not well placed Saturn. But just consider that when we're like looking at our spouse is like whether or not your Saturn is well placed, because if it's well placed, you'll get the good manifestation of Saturn. Not well placed, you'll get the shadow traits. Okay, so let's talk about these shadow traits. So of course the shadow traits of Saturn are very obvious. So that can manifest as a person who is very controlling, someone who is not adaptable at all. Like I said, Saturn energy is very firm, very stuck in its ways. Once a Saturn person chooses something, they're going to follow through and, you know, take steps to achieve that plan, no matter how long it takes. Saturn is the planet that rules delays. It rules the sense of repetition. So usually with Saturn influenced people, they're going to take a long time to do things, and they're not going to be adaptable to change if they're on that more, I guess, shadow side of Saturn. And so when it comes to accepting opinions or feedback, I feel like Saturn, the shadow side of Saturn influenced people don't really want to hear that or receive, I guess, change at all. And then also the shadow side of Saturn, I would say, is that it's very cold, it's very serious. So like I said, there's that kind of boring archetype with Saturn dominant people where it's like they just want to do their work. They want to do what's responsible, what's practical. They don't want any extra. So if you're somebody who like wants to have adventures and do spontaneous things, Saturn is like, no, we have to have a plan for that. So I feel like that's kind of like the shadow aspects of Saturn, which I guess is not really shadowy, but it's like shadowy to someone who is like opposite of that. So I feel like ultimately the shadow aspects would be someone who is controlling, though, someone who wants to control themselves and control you, because Saturn does rule regulation, it does rule control and boundaries and stuff. So you can have a spouse that is a bit controlling, someone that has that sense of, I guess, my way or the highway, like I'm not changing what I said, I'm not changing what I'm doing, someone who's not adaptable at all, someone who's kind of cold, distant, very serious, and not very emotionally responsive to you. And so let's talk about whether or not you have a well-placed Saturn and whether or not you'll receive someone with like I guess the shadow traits of Saturn or the positive traits of Saturn. So if you have a well-placed Saturn, so if your Saturn is exalted, for example, if you have Saturn in Libra, especially in your Vedic chart, then your Saturn influenced person will embody the, I guess, positive traits of Saturn, if that makes sense. But if your Saturn is not well placed, so if you have your Saturn debilitated in the sign of Aries, especially the sign of Ashwini, if you are looking at your Vedic chart, then your partner will embody more of the shadow traits of Saturn and not really, you won't really see the positive traits manifest too prominently in their personality or their characteristics. And so some other positive examples of a well-placed Saturn would be Saturn in the 7th house, for example. That's the house of Libra. And then Saturn in the 1st house would be like a negatively placed Saturn. Also, if you had Saturn like conjunct Mars, that's a pretty not so well-placed Saturn. If you had Saturn conjunct Jupiter, that kind of saves it all. So if you had like a Saturn conjunct Jupiter in like Pisces, that's a pretty solid placement. I wouldn't say you'd get like the best manifestation of Saturn influenced person, but you wouldn't get the worst either. So a lot of us have charts where it's like, of course our planet isn't perfect, it's not exalted, but some of us might not have planets that are debilitated either. So you might have a Saturn that's kind of like in the middle of those. And so if you want to know if your Saturn personally is well placed or not, you can comment down below your Saturn, what house it's in, what planets are sitting with it, if there are any planets, and then I'll comment back and tell you whether or not your spouse will embody the more, I guess, higher vibration traits of Saturn or the lower vibration. So just depending on your Saturn, whether or not it's well placed, you'll get kind of like a person who embodies the positive traits versus the shadow traits of Saturn. That is your spouse if your DK planet is Saturn, and make sure you guys subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss my next video, and I will see you guys there.